Welcome to another episode of the Global Green Action Project, a place where we get to meet amazing heroes doing great changes in the world to make it a more compassionate, kinder place through humanitarian, animal, and environmental initiatives. I'm your host, Jennifer, and for today's video, we are continuing the adventure of the incredible journey of a visionary helping to heal the world. The power of a growth mindset and a sense of wonder, how it's helped him have an incredible adventure helping others in the most incredible of ways. Our special guest expert today is the one and only Dr. John Goodman, who is a scientist, inventor, multi-published author, and educator, just to name a few of his expertise. He is going to show us the power of a growth mindset and how we can also be adventurers helping to heal the world by having that sense of wonder in our own personal journey of helping ourselves and those around us.
So I ended up being a high school teacher for the first time in my life as a part of the founding faculty of an alternative public high school in Irvine. The goal was to make a free school, more or less patterned after the idea of the Summerhill School in England, which was tragically a failure, but it was the idea of making a school for students for whom a regular school isn't appropriate. The alternative school was supposed to provide that for those students for whom the regular high school didn't work. Later on, someone asked me, who goes to this school of yours? And I said, well, there are three groups of people. One fairly small group are students who never attended the regular high school. They just couldn't stomach it. A few of them came to us from juvenile hall because they'd been caught, but most of them came to us because they had evaded the mandatory educational system, and now we were trying to entice them back. Second small group were students who just wanted school to get out of the way of their learning. They wanted to learn what they wanted to learn, the way they wanted to learn it, when they wanted to learn it. Please get off my back and let me do it. Another very small group. The largest group were kids who just liked to hang out with the other two groups. So we ran this school for those 2 years. My manager, there were 6 faculty. My manager told 6 faculty, you have each of you 2 interns that are working to get their credential, and use them as effectively as you can. We are required by the district to be comprehensive. We only have 1/10 as many students as the regular high school, but we have to offer everything they do so that students can transfer back and forth anytime they want to. And by the way, you're not allowed to buy a classroom set of books on any subject. You figure it out. So we had a modified one-room school with little bays around for the different subject matter. I just took a list of all the classes that were taught in those areas at the regular high school and said, you pick what you want, I'll take the rest. They took all the classes that had all the students. They were the simple introductory classes. I helped them. And then I had all the other classes for which there were almost no students. So there were days when I was wandering around looking for something to do, or going outside and trying to raise money for the school to get equipment or something like that. It was an interesting year. At the end of the year, my boss came to me and said, John, you were the only teacher who did exactly what I asked you to do. And you've done it so well, these kids are going to have their credentials next year. I won't actually need you. I mean, you have a 2-year contract, but I'm not going to renew it after that. 6 months later, he came to me and he said, well, actually, we want to try something else. There are still some students who won't come here. Even this school isn't good enough for them. We're going to create an alternative to the alternative, and I want you to do it with one other teacher and one aide. And so for the next 6 months, that's what we did. And he said, and by the way, take them on field trips, lots of field trips. And so I managed on a $1,000 budget for the semester to take them on a whole lot of field trips, cleverly done and enjoyably done. And it actually taught them, and we really hooked in some of them to decide really they wanted an education, because if they didn't get one, they weren't going to be able to get good jobs. Success story. So at the end of that, I really had a chance to find out what was going to happen to me. At that time, my first marriage had fallen apart. I had 2 children. We were living in Irvine together, and things were going crazy at times. We later on learned, like several years later, that the root cause was that my wife was an undiagnosed bipolar, suffering from a pretty profound case of manic depressive disease. And so she was not able to live with me or me with her. She filed for divorce. I didn't want that. I delayed it. And eventually we ended up getting a divorce with full shared custody. Each of us had the kids half of the time, and we went our separate ways. My separate way turned out to be consulting with small businesses a little bit of the time, and almost all of the time working to develop a dream. I had visited the Exploratorium in San Francisco. I don't know if you know the place. There is a similar museum in Toronto. It's an interactive science museum. I've forgotten the name of it right now. But it's a place where you can get informal science education. That's the official phrase. And it means we don't teach you anything, but we let you learn. We invite you to learn. We raise questions in your mind and provide you with the means to answer those questions for yourself. Oh, and by the way, if you have trouble, there's somebody over here called an explainer. You can ask them, they'll help you understand how to teach yourself what you want to know. That's how the Exploratorium works. There was nothing in Southern California like it at the time. Nothing. Well, there was a big museum called the Museum of Science and Industry. There's one in Chicago. There was one, a California one in Los Angeles. I actually met with the director for an hour and discovered that it was absolutely not what I wanted and would not be likely to be that anytime soon. Rather like trying to turn the Titanic mid-voyage, or the Ever Given, if you want to watch the recent news. So I decided at that point, why don't I start a science museum? Now, background on that, I had never worked in a science museum, but I had been invited to be a consultant at Scientific American magazine for 2 summers in the late 60s. And I enjoyed doing that and learned a lot about science education in that venue, which is very different from classroom education. And I had been invited, strangely enough, to be a consultant to the design office of Charles and Ray Eames. And that turned into a 5-year odyssey, also very educational, in which I was designing exhibits for IBM to put in their corporate headquarters, which later then traveled to various science museums. And so I did have some background that was relevant, but I had nothing to make it obvious that anyone should support me. Well, I had made friends with the superintendent of schools in Irvine, and I think that was behind some of the decisions they made to help us. At one point, they reached out and they said, once we got getting started, they said, well, we have these portable classrooms we're not using now. We had them while we were building the school next door, and now they've got that school built. We've taken away most of the classrooms, but we left 4 of them there. Would you like to use them for a while? I said, yes. And so he said, they gave me the keys. They said, they're yours. Do anything you like. Tear them apart if you need to. So I got to go in and open up the classrooms to each other so people could circulate and create a museum in this very small space, 1,600 square feet. Normally in a museum, roughly half of the space is public space and the other half is behind the scenes. I ended up with 80% public space, 20% behind the scenes. Ran it very efficiently. I didn't have any money, so I had to run it efficiently. And I managed to get donations for enough stuff that I could build a museum and run it with volunteers, and very successfully for about 5 years. But because I didn't have credibility in the world of nonprofits, large scale, I didn't manage to assemble a very good board of trustees. I did get a board of trustees, and they gave me some help. Unfortunately, I learned that I had all the skills I needed, bar one, and that skill I didn't know existed, and it was the skill called board management.
Interesting.
At one point, we were approaching a potential major donor who was very interested in what I had to say. And then he said, before we make our donation, we want to meet with your board. And he did. And afterwards he said, we've decided to wait a little bit to make our donation. We still like what you're doing, but we're going to wait a bit. And then as a sort of parting comment, he said, with friends like that board of yours, you don't need any enemies. I had no idea what that meant for about another year. At that point, we ran into a crisis and the board decided to shut the museum down and fire me. I had trained them on how to be a board. They had never, any of them, been on a board of a museum before. 3 months later, without my knowledge, the board chair reassembled some of the board, his friends, to start a science museum their way without me. It still exists and is a very thriving museum, not what I would have created, but it's pretty good. And they have recently, very recently, acknowledged that what I did 40 years ago was why they exist. So they have honored me as their intellectual grandparent. And that museum is indirectly one of my legacies. Now, after that, I sort of was doing whatever, and it turned out to be a whole lot of interesting whatevers. Mainly consulting with different nonprofits, but also teaching classes. One of the after the Charles and Ray Eames design studio closed because Charles died, and then later on, his wife decided she needed to close it, and then she died. The man who had hired me as a consultant for them went out and made his own studio, and he called me up, or actually wrote me a most concise letter I've ever read. It's laconic communication at its best. It came on letterhead, so I knew who it came from and how to reach back. And it contained 4 words. John, please call Glenn. So I called Glenn. He wanted me as a consultant for him, for his jobs. And we worked on a number of museums and so on, and exhibits for other things and films. And that was even before I started the summer, when I was starting the Science Museum, and after that. And then that led to other jobs. And one of those jobs was sponsored by IBM, and it came right as the IBM personal computer was new on the market. And all of the design team ended up with an IBM PC on their desk. So I had one, and I thought, PC on my desk, a little bit of time on my hands. Oh, I guess I'm a small business computer consultant now. And the first client was my landscape gardener who needed help. The next client was my lawyer who needed help. I soon became the vice president of a major user group. There were user groups formed to help people who didn't know about computers use them because businesses were adopting them wholesale and nobody knew what to do with them. So they had to, for self-defense, band together and teach each other. And soon I was invited to lecture, and soon after that, and again, and soon after that, I was elected as the vice president. And I think maybe then as the president, I don't remember right now what all happened, but did that for a while. And then I started teaching classes, helping people figure out what to do with personal computers. And then I found a company that was doing that nationwide seminars. I taught those for a few years. They were sued because the man who organized the course for them plagiarized a book by a publisher, and the publisher sued them and him. And then they hired me to run these courses instead and said, write your own workbook. So I did. And then I ended up deciding that was a lot of work for a pretty small audience. And I learned that there were computer book authors and agents, and I talked to one, and he told me how to write a proposal, and I suddenly had a contract to write a book. And then various things happened, but that was the first of 7 books that I wrote, commercially published, on how personal computers work. Most books written in that time period, this was in the 1990s, lasted about 6 months, and then they went out of print because they described how to use a program, and a new version of the program had come out by then, so the book was obsolete. Or they talked about how to fix some particular problem and people weren't having that problem anymore, so they were obsolete. I wrote about how does it work? What can it do? My argument basically was there are computers everywhere in our lives. Most of them you don't know about, nor do you need to know about them. The one that's in your wristwatch, you don't care. In your microwave oven, you don't care. The ones in your car, you don't really care there either because they just do what they do. But your personal computer does what you tell it to. And the more you know about what it does and how it does it, the more intelligently you know how to phrase what you want it to do. And when it doesn't do what you want it to do, you have a better inkling of, is it because I didn't ask right? Or is it because that's outside of its capabilities? Could I make it capable of doing that by adding something? Or is that not possible? And when it doesn't work right, you begin to have an idea of, well, maybe what went wrong? Is it possible to fix it? That made those books have long life. And in fact, long after they were out of print, they were so forward-looking that technologies I said are coming, be on the lookout for them, finally arrived like 10 years later. So the books are, technically speaking, relatively up to date even now, even though it's been 30 years, 25 years, 20 years. That's another legacy, I guess.